Okay, good morning everyone. Today I'd like to talk about streambank fencing in riparian areas. Our watershed is the Lower Little Hole watershed. It's about 30 minutes northeast of Lethbridge. It's part of the Webb's watershed evaluation of BMP project that's been going across Canada for the last 9 years. So our Webb's watershed is located on the Lower Little Bow River. Lower Little Bow River flows from left to right. It's a highly regulated river controlled by flows from the Traverse Irrigation Reservoir. And our streambank fencing BMP is on a reach of the river that was fenced off in 2001, and the length of the reach is about 800 meters. So this is the streambank fencing BMP site. There's a downstream control site here, or an impact site, an upstream control. There's fencing on both the north side and the south side of the river. There's an offstream watering system here and as well as over here. And then there's a cattle crossing that goes across to allow cattle to be rotationally moved between the two pastures on either side of the river. So these are some of the environmental variables that we measured in our study. And I'd say overall that streambank fencing had an overall positive benefit on most of the environmental variables that we measured. If we looked at river water quality, we found that there was a positive effect of streambank fencing on water quality in the river. I'll talk about some of these other ones in a little bit more detail. Janet Scott was a master's student with David Chinasek at the University of Alberta, and she did a fish survey of the fenced and unfenced reaches and found that the fish biodiversity and richness was higher in the fenced reach than the unfenced reach. So she found a positive effect in 2009. Janet is now with StemTech in Edmonton, and she did a resurvey of this reaches in 2012 and is just writing up the final report, but her preliminary results suggest that she wasn't picking up the biodiversity and richness effects that she was finding in the 2009 survey, so which suggests that there's a possible interaction with year. Some of the other variables that we've been measuring, we've been comparing, when you put a streambank fencing in along a river, you create an ungrazed riparian pasture where cattle are excluded from that pasture. So what we've been doing is comparing the grazed upland pasture on the other side of the fence with the ungrazed pasture. And in terms of rangeland health was improved. There were certain soil and vegetation properties that we measured. They were improved, but only for certain properties in certain years. And we did measure soil respiration in the ungrazed and ungrazed pastures the last 2 years. And it was greater in the ungrazed pasture than the grazed pasture in 2011, but not in 2012. In 2012, there was only 3 of 8 sampling dates where it was actually soil respiration was greater in the ungrazed pasture. And we've also been doing a study on soil mesofauna I'll talk a little bit more about. One of the things we've been doing is sampling aquatic insects in the bottom of the river. We just go in the bottom of the river and use a deframe net and take samplings at 3 locations. And we're sampling the most common insects that are in the river. And these are caddisfly larvae that are on the bottom, mayfly and dragonfly. And the unfenced reach, upstream and downstream, and then the fenced up and down. For the unfenced, if cattle are having a negative impact on the reach, you would expect that they're polluting the river and causing physical effects, and that the insects should be decreasing downstream. And this is the case for the unfenced reach. You can see there's a significant decrease in all 3 species of insects, groups of insects. However, when you go to the fenced reach, we did not get a significant effect. And what you would expect here is that if there's a positive effect from fencing on the riparian area, that the insects should increase downstream, and we didn't find this. There was a non-significant trend of caddisflies to increase slightly downstream, but there was no significant differences. We also measured riparian health, which was measured by cows and fish. They did this in 3 times. Before fencing went in 2001, and then 4 years later, and then in 2009, 8 years later. So. And it tells a different story over the different time periods. After 4 years in 2005, there was a dramatic improvement in riparian health from 65% to 81%. The rating also went from healthy with problems to healthy. And the main reason that the health improved was because of the reduction in bare ground. All the vegetation came back into that riparian area because it was fenced off. And so, and also there was some willows and preferred shrubs and trees that were starting to establish along the riverbank. However, in 2009, the rating went down. And the reason for that was because of those preferred shrubs that were starting to establish in 2005 weren't doing so well after 8 years. We're not sure of the reason. And also there was invasive plants that were starting to come into that riparian pasture because it wasn't being grazed. So it's a good illustration of how when you do a study over 8 years, that you get a more complete story of just doing it, for example, over 4 years. You get a more complete picture. We've also measured streambank erosion on the fenced and unfenced reaches using erosion pins. You simply drive these metal rods into the soil of the riverbank just so about a centimeter is exposed. And then over time, as the soil bank erodes, you just measure the distance the pin is being exposed over your time period, and you get rates of erosion on your stream bank. We found that there was a stream bank, a reach effect of the fence and unfencing on stream bank erosion as well as time. And so if we look at the reach effect, this is bank erosion in millimeters per year. You can see the light blue is the fenced reach here. The big 120 millimeters per year is the unfenced reach that's got the highest cattle impact. And then this reach here, which is unfenced, has a very low cattle impact, and it's very similar to the fenced reach. So I guess the take-home message here is that if you fence off a reach, that it can dramatically reduce stream bank erosion, particularly for high cattle impact unfenced reaches. The other study that we've been doing is with Dr. Jeff Badagelli, who's with StemTech Engineering in Sydney, BC. Jeff has a lot of experience in soil mesofauna. And what we've done is taken soil cores from grazed and ungrazed upland and riparian pastures associated with the stream bank fencing. We took the cores at 2 times, in the spring and in the fall, and we've looked at springtails, collembola, and acari, or mites or ticks, and other mesofauna like beetles, true flies, and ants. So these are some of the insects that Jeff extracted. We sent the cores to him in Sydney. He puts a heat lamp above the core. The insects are extracted at the bottom. He preserves them and then counts them and identifies them to the family and suborder level. So this is collembola here. They're called springtails because they do have a tail that allows them to spring and move around. In the soil, the tail is greatly reduced because obviously they can't jump around in soil pores. So the species in the soil don't have that tail as much. And this is the acari, beetles, and true flies that everyone knows. So just some preliminary results. I've just been working on this data recently. The acari or the mites were more dominant than collembola in all the treatments, except for the grazed riparian pasture, where collembola were dominant. And prostigmata was the most dominant mite of the taxa, except for the ungrazed riparian pasture, where Aurea batata was dominant. And these species or families tend to follow, the Aurea batata tends to be preferring less disturbed habitats. And our studies agree that prostigmata is generally the most common mite that's generally found in grasslands in Western Canada. For the collembola, Onchiuridae was the most common springtail family, and grazing location and seasonal effects occurred for all the taxa with many interactions. There was a lot of 2- and 3-way interactions. And we did calculate the Shannon-Weiner diversity index for all the soil insects, and it was greater for the ungrazed pasture than the grazed pasture, suggesting higher diversity for those soil insects in the ungrazed pasture. We also initiated a new study with Dr. Eric Bremner with Western Ag Innovations, and we wanted to use these PRS probes in the riparian area. And what we thought is, okay, what would be an interesting study to do? And it occurred to us that a lot of times the limnologists and the river people study the river water or the sediment in the bottom of the river, and the soil people tend to study the soil back on the land, and very few people tend to study this critical interface, which is the riverbank, which is basically the interaction between the water and the land. And so what we did is we installed these PRS probes in this critical interface between the water and the land in the riverbank. And we installed them at cattle access sites on fenced and unfenced reaches, and then at control sites. And then we wanted to see if we would pick up any effects of the cattle access sites and the actually fencing versus unfencing. So this is the nitrate end results. And the thing to note here is that we're getting a cattle access effect for the unfenced reach. The nitrogen is higher for the cattle access site than it is for the control sites, and that makes sense that if cattle are coming down and drinking at these sites at the river, and they're defecating and urinating at these sites and forming these black organic layers that you get in feedlot soils, then it makes sense that the nitrate is going to be higher at these cattle access sites. On the fenced reach, it was actually slightly higher in the control than the access, which is kind of opposite to what you would expect. But that fence reach has not had cattle for quite a few years. So if we look at available P, we didn't have a cattle access effect, but we had a reach effect. Available P was a lot higher for the unfenced reach compared to the fenced reach. So it looks like these preliminary results, at least for the first year that we've done this study, is that these PRS probes in the riverbank are able to pick up the effects of cattle access sites and river reaches and the impact of cattle in the riparian zone. We're hoping to repeat this experiment in the next 2 years and try and get a 3-year database to continue this study. So this is a picture of a fenced reach on the left, unfenced reach on the right. And visually, I guess most people, you would probably look at this and say, well, the fenced reach on the left looks a lot better visually, and it's kind of a no-brainer that you would prefer to have a reach fenced off. But as I'll show, there's different things, different zones here, and depending on your perspective on whether you're a cattle rancher or an environmentalist, you'll have a different perspective of this. Because you can see all the vegetation that's growing along the riverbank on the fenced reach and not on the unfenced reach. But the problem is when you try and protect this fragile riparian zone, what you do, and then you put a fence up and it gets away from the edge of the river, you lose that grazing habitat. So what you have is 3 zones. This is our fencing that was installed on the south side of the river in 2001. So you have this fragile riparian zone, right, zone 1 right here. You have riparian vegetation, high soil moisture. Then you have zone 2, which is no cattle are allowed in this zone. In our study, it's ungrazed and it's an upland pasture. There's a bench here, a topographic bench. So the flood zone, the water in the river would never come above this zone. So you have zone 1, zone 2, and then zone 3, which is a grazed upland pasture. So what happens is when you try and protect this fragile riparian zone from cattle, but you don't allow cattle to come in and graze this zone here, you have a negative impact on zone 2, but you protect zone 1. So you have this kind of catch-22 between trying to protect zone 1 and 2, the riparian zone, and the upland ungrazed pasture. So if we look at more detail on the top, you can see zone 1, which is the fragile riparian zone that you want to have all this vegetation along the riverbank. And then you can see zone 2, and you can see there's 2 main issues that arise when you don't allow cattle to graze this pasture. Number 1, you get a tremendous amount of standing biomass that grows on there that's not removed by the cattle. And visually, after a while, especially if you're a cattle rancher, you go out there and they basically say this looks like a mess. It looks like an unmanaged community pasture. And you can see also there's a tremendous amount of litter layer that built up on that ungrazed pasture as well. And there is some problems with this. Number 1, there's a fire risk of increased fire, loss of biodiversity, and there's invasive plants that start to come in because cattle aren't grazing this area. This is the damage that cattle can do to that fragile riparian zone if it's wet and cattle get in. This was an accident that happened that actually turned out to be some good scientific advice. Cattle got into this riparian zone when it was wet, and they created a lot of damage, and this was only over 2 or 3 days. This is the plugging and compaction that you can see that the cattle can cause in the riparian zone, and you can see how deep the footprints are. So this is what we looked at in our study. We had total exclusion of cattle to protect the fragile riparian zone, and you might want to use fencing to repair severely degraded riparian zones. But this is just one option. Another option is if you want to try and remove that standing biomass, is take in machinery in there and remove it as hay, and then remove that standing biomass, if you can take machinery into that area, if you don't want cattle into there. We could not take machinery into our area. The other option is rotational grazing when the riparian zone is dry and off-stream watering inside the fence to keep cattle out. And we're planning to do this in the future so we can control the standing biomass and the litter that's building up in the ungrazed pasture. Option 4 is if you have permanent fencing already installed, is you could install a portable electric fence along this riparian zone to keep cattle out of that riparian zone. Have them water at the water trough there, and then you'll protect that riparian zone but still utilize that ungrazed pasture in that zone there. Another option is to install permanent fencing closer to the river, right at this point here, to protect the fragile riparian zone, but then allow cattle to graze this whole area here. And I think this is probably a pretty good option to consider. But the risk of this option is if you put the fence, permanent fence, too close to the flood zone, and the river has a 1 in 25 year event or 1 in 10, you're going to get damage to the fencing and then expensive repairs to the fence. Another option is to install portable electric fencing without the permanent fence. Some ranchers prefer portable fencing versus permanent, and then have a watering trough further away from the riparian zone. And finally, some literature suggests that if you put a watering system greater than 200 meters from the river, that'll encourage cattle to stay away from the river. So the other option, of course, is no fence and just trying to use off-stream watering. We've been trying to use off-stream watering to pull cattle away from the river. This is a study we did with Dwayne Rogness at the County of Lethbridge, a portable watering system that was installed on this bench. And then what we did is I just calculated the number of cattle in these different zones. This zone here is zone 1. 2 is this zone around the watering system. 3 is this upland bench. 4 is the riparian zone, including this cattle access site of the river. 5 is the riparian zone on the other side, then 6 the upland pasture. And these are just some quick results. I just got the data entered this past week, and you can see that zone 2, which includes the upland area around the trough, the number of cattle is higher than at the cattle access site in the riparian zone. So it looks like cattle are preferring to use the water trough than going to the river. And in terms of drinking from the trough, the number is higher than drinking at the river, and also the number of cattle standing within 1 cattle length of the trough is higher than the river. So streambank fencing has many positive environmental benefits, but it will be costly to producers and reduce their cash flow. You can offset that cost by the increased weight gains from cattle drinking cleaner water in a water trough. And target streambank fencing at most degraded reaches that need to be rehabilitated, because fencing is going to be too expensive to recommend. We can't fence off every river and stream in Canada and Western Canada. And maybe consider some of these other management options that I showed earlier. And no cattle grazing may cause excess litter buildup in standing biomass, which can be a fire hazard, create weed problems, invasive species, and loss of biodiversity. So thank you very much.